Hello, welcome to Crimson Noir.
The village of Eldershire had always been proud of its manor, perched upon a gentle rise overlooking the surrounding countryside. Eldershire Manor had stood for nearly 3 centuries. Its stone walls, ivy-covered towers, and sweeping gardens were the subject of countless postcards and local stories. Visitors came from neighbouring counties, simply to glimpse the grand old house. To the villagers, however, the manor represented something more than history. It represented continuity, a reassuring reminder that some things never changed, that illusion was about to be shattered. The occasion was the annual Summer Garden Gala, an event hosted by the owner of the manor, Sir Reginald Ashcroft. At 72, Sir Reginald remained one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the region. Though age had slowed him somewhat, his reputation for sharp business instincts remained intact. Not everyone admired him, but nearly everyone respected him. The gala attracted a large gathering. Local residents mingled with invited guests from nearby towns. Musicians played near the rose gardens. Waiters carried trays of refreshments across immaculate lawns. Laughter drifted through the warm afternoon air. On the surface, it was a perfect English summer gathering. Miss Marple attended as the guest of an old acquaintance, Mrs. Lydia Pembroke, who had recently settled in Eldershire. The elderly detective spent much of the afternoon seated beneath a white pavilion, quietly observing those around. As always, few paid her much attention. Miss Marple preferred it that way. She soon noticed several interesting dynamics among the guests. Sir Reginald appeared cheerful enough while greeting visitors, yet there was a tension beneath his pleasant smile. Several times he checked his watch. Several times he glanced toward the manor itself, as though expecting someone or perhaps dreading someone's arrival. His nephew, Jonathan Ashcroft, seemed equally uneasy. A handsome man in his late 30s, Jonathan was widely assumed to be Sir Reginald's future heir. Yet, during conversations with guests, he appeared distracted and unusually nervous. Miss Marple observed him arguing quietly with his uncle near the terrace. The exchange lasted only moments, but whatever was said left Jonathan visibly unsettled. Elsewhere among the guests stood Clara Hastings, Sir Reginald's personal secretary. Efficient, intelligent, and highly trusted, Clara had worked at the manor for nearly 15 years. She appeared calm throughout the afternoon, though Miss Marple noticed her watching Sir Reginald with a curious expression. Not affection, not concerned. Something more complicated. Nearby lingered Dr. Edward Sinclair, the village physician and one of Sir Reginald's oldest friends. The doctor spent much of the afternoon engaged in conversation with various guests, yet even he seemed unable to relax completely. The atmosphere felt strained in subtle ways, invisible to most, not invisible to Miss Marple. As the afternoon progressed, Sir Reginald finally excused himself from the festivities. Several guests assumed he was merely attending to business matters. No one found it unusual. The manor frequently demanded his attention. An hour passed. The party continued. Champagne flowed. Music played. Conversations flourished. Then came the scream. It echoed across the gardens with startling force. Every head turned instantly. The sound had come from inside the manor. Guests rushed toward the entrance. Confusion spread rapidly. Within moments, servants emerged from the house, looking pale and shaken. One of them attempted to block access to the main staircase. The effort failed. Too many people were already pushing forward. Miss Marple followed at a more measured pace. Experience had taught her that panic rarely improved matters. Inside the manor, a crowd gathered outside Sir Reginald's private study. The door stood open. Several people stared into the room in stunned silence. Sir Reginald Ashcroft lay motionless beside his desk. A shattered crystal decanter rested nearby. Blood stained the polished floorboards. There could be no doubt. He was dead. The festive mood vanished instantly. Shock swept through the gathering. Some guests gasped, others wept openly. A few simply stared, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Dr. E. Sinclair quickly examined the body. His grim expression told everyone what they already suspected. There is nothing to be done. The words settled heavily over the room. Sir Reginald Ashcroft had been murdered. As villagers and guests struggled to absorb the news, Miss Marple allowed her gaze to wander across the study. She paid little attention to the body. Instead, she observed the reactions of those present. Fear, shock, confusion. Most displayed exactly what one would expect. One person did not. Standing near the doorway, Clara Hastings appeared unusually composed, not indifferent, not emotionless, simply unsurprised. The expression vanished almost immediately, so quickly that nobody else seemed to notice it, nobody except Miss Marple, and as she quietly studied the secretary's face, she found herself wondering whether the true mystery had begun long before Sir Reginald Ashcroft's death, because sometimes murder was merely the final consequence of secrets that had been growing for years. The death of Sir Reginald Ashcroft sent a wave of shock through Eldershire, unlike anything the village had experienced in decades. By evening, police officers had arrived at the manor, guests had been asked to remain available for questioning, and rumours had already begun spreading through the surrounding countryside. Murder was not something that belonged in Eldershire, yet there it was, impossible to ignore. Inspector Malcolm Reeves took charge of the investigation shortly after sunset. A practical and experienced detective, Reeves quickly established the basic facts. Sir Reginald had left the garden gala approximately 1 hour before his body was discovered. He had gone alone to his private study inside the manor. No one had seen him alive afterward. The study door had not been locked. There were no immediate signs of forced entry. And according to Dr. Sinclair's preliminary assessment, death had occurred within minutes of a violent blow to the head. The shattered crystal decanter lying beside the body appeared to be the likely weapon. At first glance, it seemed a straightforward case. Someone had entered the study. Someone had struck Sir Reginald. Someone had walked away unnoticed while the gala continued outside. The difficulty lay in determining who. Nearly 50 people had attended the event. Most had opportunities to move between the gardens and the manor. The list of potential suspects was alarmingly large. As questioning began, attention quickly focused on Jonathan Ashcroft. Several witnesses confirmed seeing him engaged in a tense conversation with his uncle shortly before the murder. The argument had not gone unnoticed. A gardener named Robert Ellis even recalled hearing raised voices from the terrace. "What did you hear?" Inspector Reeves asked. "Not much, sir, but something," Sir Reginald said. "I won't change my mind." And Mr. Ashcroft, he seemed angry. The information immediately made Jonathan look suspicious. When questioned, he admitted the argument without hesitation. "We disagreed." "About what?" Reeves asked. "A family matter." "What family matters?" Jonathan hesitated, then reluctantly answered. "My uncle intended to make changes to his will." The confession instantly attracted attention. Inheritance provided an obvious motive, one that juries understood very well. Yet Jonathan's manner seemed strangely open for a guilty man. He appeared worried, distressed, but not deceptive. Meanwhile, Miss Marple quietly listened to conversations unfolding around the manor. People were eager to share opinions. Many had already decided Jonathan was responsible. The theory seemed convenient. Too convenient, perhaps. Experience had taught Miss Marple that obvious suspects often attracted suspicion because someone wanted them to. The following morning, Inspector Reeves continued interviewing members of the household. Clara Hastings proved particularly interesting. She remained calm and cooperative throughout. Questioning, as Sir Reginald's secretary, she knew more about his affairs than almost anyone. "Did Sir Reginald seem concerned recently?" Reeves asked. "Yes." The answer came immediately. "Concerned about what?" "I don't know. Did he say anything?" "No, but something was troubling him." "Definitely." The inspector studied her carefully. "How can you be certain?" "Because he began locking documents in his private safe." The statement caught his attention. "Documents related to business." "I assume so. Did he mention them?" "No." "Did anyone else know about these documents?" For the first time Clara hesitated, only briefly. But Miss Marple, who happened to be nearby, noticed. "Possibly," Clara finally replied. The answer felt incomplete. Later that afternoon, another curious detail emerged. One of the servants reported seeing Sir Reginald receive a letter several days before the gala. The delivery had upset him considerably. He looked frightened, the servant explained. "Frightened?" Reeves repeated. "Yes, sir." The description surprised everyone. Fear did not seem consistent with Sir Reginald's character. He had spent a lifetime negotiating difficult business deals and confronting powerful rivals. Yet, according to the servant, the letter had visibly shaken him. Unfortunately, the letter itself could not be found. A search of the study produced nothing, neither did the manor's waste bins. It appeared to have vanished completely. That evening, while most of the village discussed Jonathan's inheritance and possible motives, Miss Marple found herself reflecting on something else entirely. People focused on the argument, the will, the money. Those details were obvious, but a different fact continued to trouble her: the missing letter. A man expecting to change his will was hardly unusual. A man receiving a letter that left him frightened was another matter entirely. Fear often pointed toward the past, toward secrets, toward things people believed buried long ago, and as dusk settled over Eldershire Manor, Miss Marple became increasingly certain that Sir Reginald Ashcroft had not been murdered because of something he planned to do. He had been murdered because of something he already knew. By the third day after the murder, Eldershire had settled into a pattern familiar to villages confronted with scandal. Every conversation eventually returned to Sir Reginald Ashcroft. Shopkeepers discussed him with customers. Neighbours exchanged theories over garden fences. Even church gatherings seemed dominated by whispers regarding the crime. Inspector Reeves continued pursuing the most obvious lines of inquiry. Jonathan Ashcroft remained the primary suspect. The argument concerning the will was difficult to ignore, and several villagers seemed convinced that the matter was already solved. Miss Marple was not among them. She had spent too many years observing human nature to trust conclusions that arrived so quickly. On Thursday morning, she accompanied Mrs. Pembroke into the village for tea. There they encountered Mrs. Beatrice Finch, a long-time resident whose talent for gathering information rivaled that of any newspaper editor. Mrs. Finch eagerly shared the latest developments. "They searched Sir Reginald's study again yesterday." "Indeed," said Miss Marple, "looking for financial papers, apparently. Did they find any?" "No, but they discovered something interesting." Mrs. Finch lowered her voice, despite there being nobody close enough to overhear. "A notebook." Miss Marple listened attentively. According to village gossip, the notebook had been hidden inside a locked drawer in Sir Reginald's desk. Most of its pages contained ordinary business notes, but several entries from recent weeks had attracted police attention. The contents were not publicly known. Still, speculation spread rapidly. By afternoon, Miss Marple learned more. Inspector Reeves himself visited Eldershire Manor and questioned several members of the household regarding names found inside the notebook. One of those names belonged to Arthur Bellamy. The elderly solicitor had served as Sir Reginald's legal advisor for many years. When interviewed, Bellamy appeared uncomfortable, not frightened, merely reluctant. According to Reeves, Bellamy admitted meeting Sir Reginald privately on several occasions during the month preceding the murder. "What did you discuss?" the inspector asked. "Personal matters." "What sort of personal matters?" Bellamy hesitated, then sighed. "Historical matters." The answer only deepened the mystery. After further questioning, Bellamy reluctantly revealed that Sir Reginald had become interested in events that occurred nearly 25 years earlier, events connected to Eldershire Manor itself. The revelation surprised everyone. Sir Reginald had owned the estate for decades. Why suddenly investigate the distant past? Unfortunately, Bellamy claimed ignorance. He never explained precisely what he was looking for. But he was searching for something? Yes. What? I wish I knew. Later that day, another unexpected detail emerged. The manor's groundskeeper, Thomas Reed, remembered witnessing a disagreement between Sir Reginald, Dr. Sinclair approximately 2 weeks before the gala. The argument had taken place near the old rose garden. What were they arguing about? Reeves asked. I couldn't hear much. Anything at all. Reed thought carefully. The doctor said, leave it alone. And Sir Reginald, he said somebody deserved the truth. The statement immediately caught the inspector's attention. Truth? About what? Nobody seemed able to answer. As fragments of information accumulated, a more complicated picture began emerging. Sir Reginald had not merely been conducting business before his death. He had been investigating something connected to the past, something serious enough to upset him, serious enough to frighten him. That evening, Miss Marple sat quietly in the manor's drawing room while several guests discussed the case. Most remained focused on Jonathan. Others suggested disgruntled business rivals. A few proposed robbery despite the obvious lack of evidence. Miss Marple listened patiently. Then her gaze settled upon Clara Hastings. The secretary sat near a window, pretending to read. Yet she was not turning pages. She was listening, watching, waiting. Miss Marple recalled Clara's expression upon discovering Sir Reginald's body. Not surprising recognition, as though an event she feared had finally occurred. The distinction was subtle but important. At that moment, Clara glanced toward a portrait hanging above the fireplace. An old painting depicting Eldershire Manor. Decades earlier, Miss Marple followed her gaze. Most people would have noticed nothing unusual, but Miss Marple observed Clara's sudden discomfort, observed how quickly she looked away, and observed something else. Near the bottom corner of the portrait stood 3 figures painted beside the manor entrance. Time had faded many details, yet one face had recently been scratched with surprising force. Not damaged by age, deliberately damaged. Someone had wanted that individual forgotten. Miss Marple studied the portrait thoughtfully. Then she smiled faintly to herself. Because in villages, as in families, people rarely destroy old memories, unless those memories remain dangerous. The damaged portrait quickly became a subject of interest for Inspector Reeves. The following morning, he arranged for it to be removed from the drawing room and examined more closely. Although the painting itself was nearly 40 years old, the scratches across the unidentified figure were much newer. Someone had deliberately attacked the image. The question was why. When members of the household were asked about the portrait, most claimed not to know anything about the damage. Several insisted they had never even noticed it. Clara Hastings offered little assistance. I've seen the painting hundreds of times, she said. I never paid much attention to the figures. The answer sounded reasonable, yet Miss Marple noticed that Clara avoided looking directly at the portrait while speaking. It was a small thing, but small things often mattered. Inspector Reeves next turned his attention toward identifying the scratched-out figure. The manor's records provided a partial answer. The painting had been commissioned to commemorate a charity fundraiser held at Eldershire Manor many years earlier. Unfortunately, the artist's notes listed only some of the individuals depicted. Several names remained missing. Still, enough information survived to establish that the damaged figure had once been closely connected to the estate. Someone important enough to appear in a formal portrait. Someone later erased from memory. Meanwhile, Jonathan Ashcroft continued struggling under the weight of suspicion. Newspapers from neighboring towns had already begun reporting the murder, and his inheritance dispute featured prominently in many accounts. The pressure was beginning to show. During another interview with Inspector Reeves, Jonathan finally revealed more about his argument with Sir Reginald. "My uncle wasn't simply changing his will," he admitted. "What else was happening?" asked Reeves. "He intended to make a public announcement." "What sort of announcement?" Jonathan hesitated. "I don't know exactly. That is difficult to believe." "It is the truth." Reeves remained unconvinced. Jonathan rubbed his forehead tiredly. He said certain mistakes needed correcting. "Mistakes?" Those were his exact words. The inspector made a note. The phrase matched what Sir Reginald had reportedly told Dr. Sinclair about someone deserving the truth. A pattern seemed to be emerging. That afternoon, another unexpected witness came forward. An elderly former housekeeper named Margaret Holloway had worked at the manor decades earlier before retiring to a nearby cottage. When shown a photograph of the damaged portrait, she immediately recognized the missing figure. Her reaction was dramatic enough to surprise everyone. "I never thought I'd see him again," she whispered. Inspector Reeves leaned forward. "Who is it?" "Peter Wainwright." The name meant nothing to most people. Miss Marple, however, watched carefully. Margaret Holloway appeared genuinely shaken. "Who was Peter Wainwright?" Reeves asked. "He managed the estate accounts many years ago." "What happened to him?" The old woman looked uneasy. "He left." "Why?" Margaret hesitated, then answered quietly. "There were accusations." "What kind of accusations?" "Financial misconduct." The room fell silent. Suddenly the mystery gained an entirely new dimension. According to Margaret, Peter Wainwright had been blamed for irregularities involving estate funds nearly 25 years earlier, though no criminal charges were ever filed. His reputation had been destroyed. Shortly afterward, he disappeared from Eldershire. No one seemed to know where he went, or what became of him. That evening, Miss Marple reflected upon the information while walking through the manor gardens. The pieces were beginning to connect. Sir Reginald had been investigating old events. He had spoken repeatedly about truth and correcting mistakes. A forgotten estate accountant had been accused of wrongdoing decades earlier, and someone had recently attempted to erase that man's image from a historic portrait. The timing could hardly be coincidental. As she considered these matters, she noticed Dr. Sinclair standing alone near the rose garden. He appeared troubled, far more troubled than a grieving friend might reasonably be. When he spotted Miss Marple approaching, he forced a smile, yet his discomfort remained obvious. They exchanged a few polite words before parting. Nothing remarkable was said. Nevertheless, Miss Marple left the conversation with a growing sense of certainty. The doctor knew more than he had revealed, not necessarily about the murder, but certainly about the past. And if Peter Wainwright's name had resurfaced after 25 years, there was every possibility that Sir Reginald had discovered something capable of overturning everything Eldershire believed about an old scandal, something powerful enough to frighten people, and perhaps powerful enough to kill for. Rain arrived over Eldershire the following morning, draping the village in a grey mist that seemed entirely appropriate to the mood surrounding the investigation. The murder remained unsolved, and with each passing day, speculation grew more intense. Inspector Reeves now found himself pursuing two mysteries, rather than one. There was the question of who had killed Sir Reginald Ashcroft, and there was the equally puzzling matter of Peter Wainwright. The long-forgotten accountant had somehow become connected to events leading up to the murder. What nobody yet understood was how, at Eldershire Manor, another search of Sir Reginald's private study produced an important discovery. Hidden inside a leather-bound book on the upper shelf of a cabinet was a folded piece of paper. It was not the missing letter that had reportedly frightened Sir Reginald, but it was significant nonetheless. The paper contained a list of names written in Sir Reginald's own hand. Peter Wainwright appeared at the top. Beneath it were 4 additional names: Dr. Edward Sinclair, Arthur Bellamy, Harold Sutton, Eleanor Sutton. Inspector Reeves immediately began investigating the connections between them. The solicitor, Arthur Bellamy, was already known to have met privately with Sir Reginald. The doctor had argued with him shortly before the murder. The remaining two names belonged to a married couple who had once lived at Eldershire Manor as employees during the period of the old financial scandal. Unfortunately, Harold Sutton had died nearly 10 years earlier. His widow, Eleanor, still resided in the village. That afternoon, Reeves paid her a visit. Mrs. Sutton proved cooperative, though visibly surprised by the questions. When shown Peter Wainwright's name, she grew quiet. "I haven't heard that name in years," she said. "Did you know him well?" Reeves asked. "As well as anyone working at the manor knew him. What kind of man was he?" The elderly woman looked thoughtful. "Honest." The answer surprised the inspector. "You were certain?" "Quite certain. Yet he was accused of stealing money." Mrs. Sutton shook her head firmly. "Many people believed that. You didn't know." The conviction in her voice was unmistakable. Reeves leaned forward. "Why not?" "Because my husband handled records for the estate. And he always said something about the accusations felt wrong." The statement immediately caught the inspector's attention. For years, everyone had assumed Peter Wainwright was guilty. Now another witness was questioning that conclusion. As news of the interview spread through the village, old memories began resurfacing. Several elderly residents recalled details they had long forgotten. One remembered heated meetings at the manor. Another recalled seeing Peter Wainwright publicly defend himself. A third insisted the accusations had appeared suddenly and without warning. Bit by bit, the certainty surrounding the old scandal began to crack. Meanwhile, Miss Marple continued making observations of her own. That evening, she sat in the manor library while various guests and household members discussed recent developments. The conversation naturally turned toward Peter Wainwright. Most people expressed surprise that his name had become relevant again. One person did not. Clara Hastings remained unusually silent. She neither contributed nor encouraged discussion. Instead, she seemed intent on avoiding the subject entirely. Miss Marple found this intriguing. People often revealed themselves through what they chose not to say. Later, as the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple happened to pass through a corridor overlooking the rear gardens. There she observed something unexpected. Dr. Sinclair stood near a window speaking quietly with Clara Hastings. Neither realized they were being watched. The conversation appeared tense. At one point, Clara shook her head emphatically. The doctor replied with obvious frustration. Then, Clara spoke a sentence that Miss Marple could not fully hear. Only the final words reached her. "Before someone else finds out." The doctor went pale. A moment later they separated and moved in opposite directions. Neither noticed Miss Marple. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it left a strong impression, because it suggested that whatever secret connected Sir Reginald's investigation to the events of 25 years earlier, at least two people already understood it, and they were worried, very worried. That night, while rain tapped softly against the manor windows, Miss Marple sat beside the fire, considering everything she had learned. Sir Reginald had investigated the past. Peter Wainwright's guilt was no longer certain. Old witnesses were beginning to question established truths, and hidden among those truths was a secret important enough to inspire fear long before the murder occurred. Somewhere within the history of Eldershire Manor lay the reason Sir Reginald Ashcroft had died. The challenge was determining whose life would be destroyed when that reason finally emerged. The investigation entered a new phase when Inspector Reeves received information from an unexpected source. A retired bank manager named Leonard Graves contacted the police after reading reports about the murder and the renewed interest in Peter Wainwright. Graves had lived outside Eldershire for many years, but during the period of the financial scandal he had worked at the local branch, where the estate conducted much of its business. His memory, despite his age, remained remarkably clear. When Reeves interviewed him, the retired banker provided a detail that immediately attracted attention. Everyone assumed Peter Wainwright had access to the missing funds, Graves explained. Didn't he? Yes. And nobody else? Graves shook his head. That was the problem. What do you mean? There were others. The answer surprised the inspector. For decades, the story had been presented as a simple matter. Estate funds disappeared. Peter Wainwright had access to them. Peter Wainwright became the obvious culprit, but according to Graves, the situation had been considerably more complicated. Several senior figures associated with the estate had possessed similar authority. Among them was a man named Charles Fairchild. The name appeared nowhere in the original police records, nor did it appear in the recent notebook found in Sir Reginald's study. Yet Graves insisted Fairchild had been heavily involved in estate finances during that period. What happened to him? Reeves asked. He left. Shortly after the accusations, like Wainwright. Not exactly. Graves hesitated. Fairchild prospered. The distinction was significant. While Peter Wainwright's reputation collapsed, Charles Fairchild went on to build a successful business elsewhere. It was an intriguing contrast. One man ruined, another untouched. That afternoon, Inspector Reeves searched estate archives stored in the manor's basement. After several hours, he uncovered old correspondence mentioning Fairchild repeatedly. Even more interestingly, several letters suggested that Peter Wainwright and Charles Fairchild had once been close friends. The discovery raised troubling possibilities. If Wainwright had been innocent, someone else must have benefited from his downfall. Meanwhile, Miss Marple continued observing the people around her. She had become increasingly interested in Dr. Sinclair. The village physician remained cooperative with the investigation, yet a subtle strain seemed to follow him wherever he went. He slept poorly, he appeared distracted, and on several occasions Miss Marple noticed him studying old photographs displayed throughout the manor, as though searching for something, or remembering something. One evening, she found him alone in the library examining a collection of albums. He closed one rather abruptly when she entered, looking through old memories. Miss Marple asked pleasantly. The doctor smiled. Something like that. One often finds surprises in old photographs. For a brief moment his expression changed. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Miss Marple. Yes, he said quietly, sometimes rather unpleasant surprises. The remark lingered in her mind long after the conversation ended. The following day brought another development. While cataloguing Sir Reginald's personal papers, Clara Hastings discovered a sealed envelope hidden inside a locked drawer. The envelope contained a single photograph. It was old and slightly faded. The image showed a group of people standing outside Eldershire Manor 25 years earlier. Several faces were familiar. A younger Dr. Sinclair stood among them. So did Arthur Bellamy. So did Harold Sutton. And standing near the center was Peter Wainwright. What drew immediate attention, however, was another figure. A man whose face strongly resembled photographs recently located of Charles Fairchild. Across the back of the photograph, Sir Reginald had written a note. Only 6 words. Someone known here knows the truth. E. Kaufer. Inspector Reeves stared at the message for a long time. The meaning seemed obvious. Before his death, Sir Reginald had concluded that at least one person connected to the old scandal was still alive and still hiding crucial information. The realization transformed the entire investigation. No longer was the murder merely about inheritance, disputes, or personal grievances. It was becoming increasingly clear that Sir Reginald's death was linked directly to secrets buried for a quarter of a century. That evening, as darkness settled over Eldershire Manor, Miss Marple sat quietly by a drawing-room window. Outside, lights glowed across the grounds. Inside, nervous conversations filled the air. She thought about the photograph, about Charles Fairchild, about Peter Wainwright, and most importantly, about the words written by Sir Reginald shortly before he died. Someone knew the truth. The question was whether that person had spent 25 years protecting an innocent man, or 25 years protecting a guilty one. The photograph discovered among Sir Reginald's papers became the center of attention throughout the investigation. Inspector Reeves arranged for copies to be made and began showing them to anyone who might recognize details that had previously gone unnoticed. Most people simply identified familiar faces. A few offered vague recollections. Then, quite unexpectedly, a breakthrough arrived. The source was Arthur Bellamy. The elderly solicitor requested a private meeting with Inspector Reeves at Eldershire Manor. When Reeves arrived, Bellamy appeared exhausted, as though carrying a burden that had grown heavier with each passing day. For several moments, he remained silent. Then he finally spoke. "I should have said something sooner." The inspector waited. "About what?" "About Peter Wainwright." The answer immediately sharpened Reeves's attention. Bellamy clasped his hands together. 25 years ago, Peter came to see me. What did he want? Legal advice regarding the cell. Accusations? Yes, Bellamy sighed heavily. He swore he was innocent. The statement itself was hardly surprising. Many accused people claimed innocence, yet Bellamy's expression suggested there was more. "Did you believe him?" Reeves asked. "At the time, I wasn't sure, and now I do." The room fell silent. Bellamy then revealed something he had never previously disclosed. A few days before leaving Eldershire, Peter Wainwright had handed him a sealed packet of documents for safekeeping. The papers were intended to protect him if new evidence ever emerged. "Where are they now?" Reeves asked. Bellamy looked uncomfortable. "Gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I kept them for years." "Then what happened?" "They disappeared." The revelation was astonishing. According to Bellamy, the packet had vanished from his office nearly 2 decades earlier. No sign of forced entry had ever been found. No explanation had ever emerged. At the time, he assumed the documents were probably unimportant. Now he deeply regrets that assumption. "What was in them?" Reeves asked. "I never opened the packet. You have no idea." "None." The inspector left the meeting frustrated but intrigued. If Peter Wainwright had possessed evidence supporting his innocence, someone had apparently gone to considerable effort to ensure it remained hidden. Meanwhile, Miss Marple spent the afternoon speaking with Eleanor Sutton. The elderly widow welcomed her warmly and seemed relieved to discuss matters that had troubled her for years. As they drank tea together, Eleanor shared memories of the old scandal. "The village was cruel to Peter," she said quietly. "People can be." He never seemed bitter. No, he seemed bewildered. The distinction interested Miss Marple. A guilty man exposed might be angry. An innocent man falsely accused might indeed be bewildered. Eleanor stirred her tea thoughtfully. "There was one thing that always bothered Harold. Your husband." "Yes." "What was that?" "The timing." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "The timing of what?" "The accusations." Eleanor frowned as she searched her memory. Harold always thought it strange that evidence appeared immediately after Peter and Charles Fairchild had some sort of disagreement. Miss Marple remained silent. Encouraging, Eleanor continued. "They'd been close friends for years. What happened between them? I never knew." The information was small, yet it fits neatly with other pieces already emerging. That evening, another discovery complicated matters further. While reviewing old newspaper archives, Inspector Reeves found reports concerning Peter Wainwright's departure from Eldershire. Most articles portrayed him as a disgraced accountant fleeing scandal. One article, however, contained a curious detail. A journalist had written that Wainwright publicly accused another individual shortly before leaving the village. The name was omitted from the report, but the accusation itself was recorded. According to the article, Peter had claimed he was being used as a scapegoat. At the time, nobody believed him. The statement had been dismissed as desperation. Now it seemed far more significant. Later that night, Miss Marple sat alone in the manor library, examining copies of the old photograph. Her attention settled upon Charles Fairchild's face. The more she studied it, the more something troubled her. Not the photograph itself, the reactions surrounding it. Whenever Fairchild's name arose, people became uncomfortable, not fearful, not shocked, merely reluctant, as though discussing a subject they preferred to forget. Miss Marple had encountered that behavior many times before. It often appeared when individuals were concealing shame rather than guilt, and that distinction, she suspected, might eventually prove crucial, because secrets buried for 25 years rarely survived through the efforts of one person alone. They survived because many people, for many different reasons, chose silence over truth. The following week began with a discovery that altered the direction of the investigation once again. Inspector Reeves received a call from a solicitor's office in London regarding Peter Wainwright. The news was unexpected. Peter Wainwright was not dead. After years of uncertainty and rumor, he had been located living quietly in a small coastal town under his own name. The revelation spread rapidly through Eldershire. For decades, villagers had spoken of him almost as a ghost from the past. Some assumed he had emigrated, others believed he had died years earlier. Now it appeared he had simply chosen to disappear from the place that had ruined him. Inspector Reeves immediately arranged to visit him. To the inspector's surprise, Peter Wainwright agreed to speak openly. Age had changed him. He was now a thin, white-haired man whose face carried the marks of hardship. Yet there remained a quiet dignity about him that Reeves found difficult to ignore. When shown the photograph discovered among Sir Reginald's papers, Peter studied it silently. His eyes lingered on several faces, then finally settled on Charles Fairchild. A shadow crossed his expression. "You knew him well?" Reeves asked once. "What happened between you?" Peter remained silent for a long moment. Trust ended. The answer was vague but sincere. Reeves pressed further. "Did Charles Fairchild steal the missing estate funds?" Peter looked toward the window. "I can't prove that." "But you suspected him." "I suspected someone." The distinction was frustrating, yet Peter seemed unwilling to elaborate. When informed of Sir Reginald's murder, he appeared genuinely saddened. "He wrote to me," Peter said unexpectedly. The inspector looked up. "When?" "About 2 months ago." This was the first indication that Sir Reginald had contacted him directly. "What did he say?" "He apologized." The word hung in the air. "For what? For not defending me?" Peter's voice remained calm, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. He said he had spent years believing the wrong things, and recently changed his mind. "Yes, why?" Peter slowly shook his head. He didn't explain. The interview yielded few concrete answers. Yet one conclusion became increasingly clear. Sir Reginald had been actively trying to correct an injustice before his death. Back at Eldershire Manor, Miss Marple found herself increasingly interested in another aspect of the case, not the old accusations, not even Charles Fairchild. Her attention had shifted toward the reactions of those still living in the village. Particularly, Dr. Sinclair. Over the previous days, the physician had grown noticeably more anxious. Several times Miss Marple observed him starting conversations, only to abandon them halfway through. He seemed distracted by thoughts he could not comfortably share. One afternoon she encountered him in the manor gardens. The doctor appeared exhausted. "You seem troubled," Miss Marple remarked gently. "A murder. Investigation tends to have that effect." "Quite." He attempted a smile. It did not last. After a brief silence, he surprised her. "Do you believe people should always know the truth?" The question seemed oddly personal. Miss Marple considered carefully. "Not always immediately." Dr. Sinclair frowned. "But, eventually, truth has a habit of arriving eventually, whether we welcome it or not." The doctor's expression darkened. For a moment, he looked as though he wished to say something more. Then, he changed his mind. That evening, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Among Sir Reginald's correspondence, investigators located a recent note written entirely in his own hand. Unlike the mysterious letter that had frightened him, this was clearly a personal memorandum. It contained only a single sentence. Fairchild was not the beginning. The meaning puzzled everyone. If Charles Fairchild had not been responsible for starting the chain of events 25 years earlier, then another person had played an even more important role, someone whose name had not yet surfaced, someone still hidden. As darkness settled over Eldershire, Miss Marple sat quietly beside the drawing-room, fire reviewing everything she had learned. Peter Wainwright had been abandoned by people who should have defended him. Sir Reginald had discovered enough to seek forgiveness. Charles Fairchild remained suspicious, yet perhaps not central, and somewhere within the tangled history of the manor stood another figure whose importance had escaped notice. Miss Marple suspected the investigation was approaching a turning point because the truth was no longer buried. It was beginning to push its way to the surface, and when it finally emerged, it would almost certainly implicate someone whom the village trusted completely. The memorandum stating that Charles Fairchild was not the beginning occupied Inspector Reeves for much of the following week. The sentence suggested that Sir Reginald had uncovered a deeper layer to the mystery shortly before his death. The question was where that discovery had led him. By now, the investigation into the murder and the old financial scandal had become inseparable. Every new fact seemed to point backward into the past, toward decisions made 25 years earlier. Yet, the scène équivoque identity of the killer remained frustratingly elusive. Jonathan Ashcroft's position had improved considerably. Evidence increasingly suggested that his dispute with Sir Reginald concerned family finances rather than murder. While he remained under scrutiny, Reeves privately admitted that the case against him appeared weaker than before. Instead, attention was beginning to shift elsewhere. One morning, Arthur Bellamy requested another meeting with the inspector. This time, he arrived carrying a Reese's small leather diary. "I found this among some old files," he explained. The diary had belonged to Harold Sutton. Though many pages contained routine notes regarding estate maintenance, several entries from the period of the scandal attracted immediate attention. Most were brief. One sentence, however, stood out: "R knows but refuses to act." The initials appeared repeatedly throughout the diary. Unfortunately, Harold had never recorded the full name. Inspector Reeves studied the entry carefully. "Do you have any idea who R might be?" Bellamy answered almost at once. "Reginald." The possibility seemed obvious. Even 25 years ago, Sir Reginald Ashcroft had controlled much of the estate's administration. If Harold Sutton's interpretation was correct, Sir Reginald may have known something important about the accusations against Peter Wainwright, something he chose not to reveal. The discovery cast the dead man in a new light, not as a villain, but perhaps as someone burdened by guilt. That afternoon, Reeves reviewed additional diary entries. Several referred to heated disagreements among senior staff. Others mentioned pressure to remain silent. One note proved particularly troubling: "If the truth comes out, more than one reputation will be destroyed." The sentence lingered in the inspector's thoughts long after he finished reading. Meanwhile, Miss Marple found herself paying closer attention to Clara Hastings. The secretary had remained remarkably composed throughout the investigation, too composed, perhaps, not because she seemed guilty, rather because she seemed prepared, as though many recent revelations had failed to surprise her. Late that evening, Miss Marple encountered Clara in the manor library. The secretary was examining a collection of old newspapers. She quickly closed the volume when she realized she was not alone. Miss Marple smiled pleasantly. "Researching local history, a little. It can be quite revealing." Clara hesitated. Then unexpectedly I laughed. "More revealing than some people would like." The response interested Miss Marple. It suggested knowledge, not necessarily of the murder, but certainly of the secrets surrounding it. The following day brought the most significant development yet. A former estate employee named William Harper came forward after hearing reports about Peter Wainwright. At 90 years old, Harper's memory was imperfect, but one recollection remained remarkably vivid. He remembered a meeting held shortly before the accusations against Peter became public. Several senior figures attended. Among them were Sir Reginald Ashcroft and Charles Fairchild. There was also a third individual, a person Harper had nearly forgotten. When shown photographs from the period, he identified the man immediately. The name stunned Inspector Reeves. Richard Morton, the estate's former financial auditor. Unlike Fairchild or Wainwright, Morton had scarcely appeared in surviving records. In fact, he seemed almost absent from them. Yet, according to Harper, Morton possessed extensive knowledge of estate accounts. "What happened to him?" Reeves asked. Harper frowned. "He left not long afterward." "Why? I don't know." The answer offered little certainty, yet it introduced a new possibility. Perhaps Charles Fairchild had not been the central figure after all. Perhaps attention had focused on him simply because he was visible. Richard Morton, by contrast, had faded almost completely from memory. That evening, as rain drifted softly against the manor windows, Miss Marple reviewed the growing list of names connected to the past. Peter Wainwright, Charles Fairchild, Richard Morton, Sir Reginald Ashcroft, and several others who had chosen silence over honesty. A pattern was emerging, not one of theft alone, nor even of murder. It was a pattern of complicity, of people who knew fragments of the truth and allowed an innocent man to suffer, because exposing the truth would have carried consequences of its own. Miss Marple suspected the final answer was now very close. The difficulty was that the person responsible for Sir Reginald's death had almost certainly realized the same thing, and desperate people often made dangerous choices when old lies began collapsing around them. 2 days after Richard Morton's name resurfaced, Inspector Reeves gathered a small group of people in the drawing room of Eldershire Manor. The investigation had reached its conclusion. Rain fell steadily outside. Inside, tension filled the room. Present were Jonathan Ashcroft, Clara Hastings, Dr. Sinclair, Arthur Bellamy, Eleanor Sutton, and several others connected to the case. Miss Marple sat quietly near the fireplace, knitting resting peacefully in her lap. Inspector Reeves rose. "Thank you all for coming." Nobody spoke. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashcroft and the scandal involving Peter Wainwright are, as we suspected, directly connected. Several faces tightened. "For many years," Reeves continued, "Peter Wainwright was believed responsible for missing estate funds. We now know that conclusion was false." Arthur Bellamy lowered his eyes. Eleanor Sutton nodded sadly. The evidence eventually uncovered by Sir Reginald pointed elsewhere. Richard Morton, the estate auditor, had manipulated financial records and concealed irregular transactions. Peter Wainwright discovered discrepancies and began asking questions. A murmur spread through the room. Reeves continued. Morton realized he was in danger working with Charles Fairchild. He redirected suspicion toward Peter. Fairchild benefited financially and remained silent. Morton left Eldershire shortly afterward. Jonathan stared in disbelief. So Peter was innocent all along? Yes. The answer came not from Reeves but from Miss Marple. Her gentle voice drew every eye. He was sacrificed because accusing him was easier than facing a larger scandal. The room remained silent. Reeves nodded. Sir Reginald eventually uncovered enough evidence to realize what had happened. He contacted Peter Wainwright and intended to publicly clear his name. Dr. Sinclair looked deeply troubled. As Harold Sutton's diary suggested, Miss Marple continued softly, Sir Reginald knew more than he admitted. He carried that burden for years. The inspector took a breath. Unfortunately, someone feared what Sir Reginald was about to reveal. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Everyone understood what came next. The murderer is not Jonathan Ashcroft. Jonathan visibly relaxed. Nor is Clara Hastings. Clara remained motionless. Reeves turned toward a single figure, Dr. Edward Sinclair. Shock swept through the room. Several people gasped. The doctor sat perfectly still. For a moment nobody moved. Then he gave a weary smile. "I suppose Miss Marple figured it out." No one answered. The doctor looked toward the window. My father was Richard Morton. The confession stunned everyone. He changed our surname after leaving Eldershire. Few people knew who he had once been. The room fell silent. Miss Marple spoke gently. You knew Sir Reginald had uncovered the truth. Yes, and you knew the truth would destroy your father's reputation. Dr. Sinclair nodded. He spent his life rebuilding himself. He was dead by the time Sir Reginald started investigating, but everything he built, everything my family became, would have collapsed. Arthur Bellamy stared at him. So you killed Reginald? The doctor closed his eyes. He told me he intended to reveal everything during the gala. The admission was barely above a whisper. I begged him not to, and when he refused, Reeves asked. Dr. Sinclair's voice trembled. I followed him into the study. No one interrupted. He believed the truth would finally free Peter Wainwright. The doctor swallowed hard, and I knew it would condemn my father forever. The rest required no explanation. The argument, the crystal decanter, the fatal blow. Years of buried guilt had ended in a moment of panic. Miss Marple looked at him sadly. That is the tragedy of secrets. People imagine they are protecting the dead when often they are only harming the living. Dr. Sinclair did not argue. At last, he lowered his head. Outside, rain continued falling over Eldershire Manor. Inside, a decades-old injustice had finally been exposed. Peter Wainwright's name would be cleared. Sir Reginald's efforts would not be forgotten, and the village would learn that the quiet scandals of the past rarely disappear. They merely wait. Later, as the gathering dispersed and police escorted Dr. Sinclair away, Miss Marple stood beside the drawing-room window. The manor grounds stretched into the mist beyond. Peace would eventually return to Eldershire. It always did, yet human nature remained unchanged. People feared shame, they feared judgment, and sometimes, in trying to hide yesterday's sins, they created today's tragedies. Miss Marple sighed softly and returned to her knitting, while beyond the rain-streaked glass the village carried on, wiser perhaps, but no less human than before.